Hello, I am Joseph, the overall Diablo site manager over at Blizzard.com and host of Seth and Shield Rebirth. And we're here today for Development Hell number 5, which is a rather long in status but short in article series, or in this case video series, about Diablo in general. And the whole point about the Development Hell series is looking at individual systems, or in the case of Development Hell number 4, was looking at Diablo 3 and all the various systems and improving them, and looking forward to the next iteration in the Diablo franchise and seeing what we could do there. Now, Development Hell number 4 was started almost a year ago, and here we are a year later talking about Diablo 4. Now, this feedback video, on top of the articles I've done on BlizzPro.com, on top of all the coverage I'm going to continue to do, is part of the handshake that I have with Blizzard, because they invited me to BlizzCon this year with a media badge. I'm thankful for that, and I want to make sure I uphold my end of that bargain, not only as a player, but as someone who is, one way or another, for better or worse, deemed worthy of a certain status, whatever that may be. So again, thank you, Blizzard. This is going to be a feedback video for that, and let's try to I'll try my best to keep this as short as possible, even though I often fail at that. I'll try to keep it on the rails, try to keep all things under control as best as I can, impulse wise. But other than that, let's head over to the first group of topics revolving around the world. Alright, the world. And other things that are involved in it. I generally love how the world is being built. I love how it's one big continuous area. I like how borders are not going to be so much a thing anymore, how the art team and the world builders will be able to have drastically changing environments, themes, settings, day-night cycles, being able to work in a whole new way with a world that actually feels alive and not just situational depending on how the story dictates it, which is kind of how it felt a little bit in Diablo 3. And also how it's going to be 5 regions, and within each of those regions we'll have, just a regular overworld area, we'll have the PvP areas, we'll have the world boss areas, and we'll have dungeons, and maybe possibly more as we go along. And something that I can really appreciate, it wasn't until one of the fellow editors over at BlizzPro told me that it makes such a stark difference when the dungeons are in a fixed location, or at least the entrances to those dungeons are in a fixed location, because you can really build a theme around them. They're tied to a certain part of the world, and I guess there's no real other way to show the example that the church in Tristram, it was in Tristram. We all know why Tristram and New Tristram all had their problems around them because of location and what was lurking below the surface. It would feel different if playing, of course, Diablo 1, Diablo 2, if all those locations that have real importance were just randomly elsewhere. The church was, instead of being where it was in a swampy area. The next time we played, excuse me, was in the desert. The location change, it kind of loses the immersion, kind of loses that impact. And I feel, even though a certain amount of randomability may have been lost, I feel what has been gained, through the course of events, net, is a really strong positive. And if the randomability of dungeons is really hit home, then I feel it's a perfect marriage of a certain open MMO experience with the world, and having these really random, different, unique experiences inside dungeons themselves. And I mean, I wish I could say more. I wish we got to experience more of the world. Um, yeah, so that's the general overview thought of the world, and now we're going to start moving to each individual item that I want to call out, and we're going to start with the first one right up now. And the first item I want to talk about is mounts. Now, I love the concept of the mounts. I understand fully why we're being given them, because, like I said before, the area that we're going to be traveling through is massive. So having mounts with waypoints, even though it's going to be far fewer waypoints than we're used to in Diablo 3, I think is great. We get to actually be in a world that is threatening, that really comes after us, and we can't bypass it all. We have to deal with what's in front of us. And if mounts allow us to get past a little bit of that, but there's still an element of danger, A plus from me. Now, I also like how we're going to be able to customize these horses and add equipment and all this such, along with, even though we may have a burning horse or an undead horse or a regular horse or a horse that's flayed with half its face missing, it's still a horse. It's still grounded in the world. We're not going in the La La Land where we're going to be riding fallen lunatics as our mounts. Like, no. There's going to be consistency throughout the world, like, the art scheme, the colors, how each individual part makes up this world, and we're all just actors on it. And I love how that feels. But the only, it's going to sound dramatic, but word of caution I can say with mounts is, with the equipment that we're going to be able to put on these things, I would advise not putting anything with plus mount speed on it. And I just say that because, if there are that, it will kind of be the de facto decision, and you'll kind of have to make other things just as a hard decision to do it. Now, I'm not against hard decisions necessarily, but the other point B being, the amount is the speed increase. So why are we going to have items with more mount speed? It's like saying, okay, your crawling will allow you to walk, but then when you walk, will also allow you to run at the same time. So I feel it's unnecessary, and it allows more choice for other things that could be put on these items. And I assume they'll follow the same kind of affix system that our items, the player items, will follow. But I feel it's unnecessary, and it kind of creates a scenario where we, the player, feel like if we're not choosing it, we're somehow losing out. It's like a FOMA, essentially, of not having a plus B thing. And we can kind of dismiss it saying like, well, you can switch out items, but I don't think we should be building in a system where we're encouraging, okay, swap out these items because you're going them out, and then inventory management and all this kind of overdoing needless complexity, so to speak, for something that really should just be simple. Like, you have a mount, equip with items, and you're done. So yeah, so keep it short. Love mounts, love the idea, love that they're so grounded, but let's make sure that we're not double dipping and creating a situation of FOMO. And just, the mounts are the speed increase, let's keep it at that. Alright, so the second item is world bosses. And I love the idea of world bosses. I love how they are. I love what I did at the demo. Going up Shava, killing her killing us multiple times. It was all fun and dandy. I love how they're going to be cornered out in the world, how you can go there, you can kind of schedule your time around it. But upon thinking about how would I feel about the 5th time, the 10th time, the 50th time doing these world bosses, taking that step back for a moment, the system began to feel a little stale. It felt a little one-notey. And when you really say, alright, I log in, I mean, I'm doing endgame dungeons, I'm doing whatever the next thing is, and the next set of endgame progression is, and I look at the world boss, I'm like, alright, I can do that. It took me 10 minutes to get there. Big bang boom, kill it along with everybody else. Get some gold, get some stuff. I'm done. That's about the excitement level I have for world bosses now, because I'm thinking about that in the future. Now, that's me. That's my opinion. But it's not for the lack of excitement for the system itself. Those are two separate things. So, I think the two main issues I have is the stillness factor, and also the thought of someone being able to come in the last 5 or 10% of a world boss, getting the last hit, getting credit for getting one hit on the boss or 2 hits on the boss, and getting the same reward that I could have or my friend could have for minimal effort. Because at that point, the game is not rewarding my effort. It's rewarding someone for the minimal amount of time. And if it's just the same reward structures have, I could get nothing, and that person could get a legendary or even a mythic possibly. So where's the balance here in all this? So with those two issues, I want to propose one solution that actually kind of handles both of them. And for the solution, I look back towards Warhammer Online: Age of Reckoning. They had a system called Public Quests, and with the Public Quests, there were difficulties to them. So there were some Public Quests that were easy, some were hard, some were in between, which was a great thing for you while you're leveling in each zone. And each Public Quest was split up into chapters or stages. So usually chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and then after that, rewards were dished out based on your overall contribution. So taking that system and thinking, how can we realize that in Diablo 4 with world bosses, would go pretty much like this. You would enter in the Ashava event area, and then the ticker, the countdown would go by, and then stage 1 would happen. You would see 5 drowned summoners come up in a pentagram around the summoning pool, but they would have immunity shield around them. Can't attack them, can't damage them, but they don't come after you. And then from the north, a whole bunch of drowned just start coming out of nowhere. And in stage 1, you have to clear them all out. So say there's 50 or 100. So you and the group have to go up there and just kill them all. And once that happens, you enter stage 2, which is going after the drowned summoners. Now these drowned summoners are elites. They have 2 or 3 affixes to them, so they're going to be a little gnarly to take on, especially if you have to take on 2 or 3 at once, and you can't work with your group to kind of keep 1 or 2 away from the group, such like that. So you work your way through the summoners, but in this stage you have 7 minutes. You have 7 minutes to kill all the summoners. And this is where, on top of having easy, moderate, and hard world boss events, so there's a gradient of difficulty, you can also have differences in the stages within a world event. Some could be just kill everything, some could be you have a time, some could be you have to activate a certain amount of platforms or levers, or you have to protect a caravan, whatever it may be. You can really make these things really dynamic and really interesting, and really increase the replayability and people wanting to seek these out and really play through them to see how good they can do. So you're in the group, you've cleared out stage 1, you managed to clear out all the summoners, so when the Shava pops in stage 3, you only have a Shava to deal with. But if you're in a group that was maybe not so efficient, you have 1 summoner or 2 summoners left from stage 2. They carry over to stage 3. So it makes stage 3 a little bit harder, but it shows you, the game shows you why you should not disrespect, essentially, the system. Like, no, handle everything in stage 2 so you don't have to deal with it in stage 3. And that can apply to any world boss that it gets created. So get to stage 3, you get to Shava, you kill a Shava, all the gold items that could drop from her. You get gold experience from completing the event itself. And then finally, individualized ranking per that event, per that time, comes up, and it shows how good everyone did at contributing to the world event itself. That could be anything from damage dealt to healing done if a healing class gets involved. Stagger contributed, and any other sort of positive things that the player can do. And there could be an ultimate balancer of, well, how many times did the player die? So if someone contributed a lot of stagger and did a lot of damage, but they just kept on getting in there like on a bar and just doing all their abilities, and then they died 5 times, well, you can kind of balance it against there. So death has meaning in these world events, and you make sure that, at least softcore wise, death means something, which is also a good aspect. And then based on where you are in this ranking system, you would get a cache, and this cache could have crafting materials, it could have gold, it could have anything that we just don't know about yet that you, the developer, are coming up with. But that's where the real meat of the reward for world bosses should be. Because if someone comes up in this particular system that I described and tries to last hit, they're going to be down in the dumps on the ranking system. They're not going to get that much of a reward. So it disincentivizes coming in last minute and essentially last hitting a world boss. The people who were there at the beginning have the greatest chance of getting the greatest reward. But people who came in about halfway or even a little bit later than that, if they know what they're doing and they know how to execute their build efficiently, and they know the world bosses because they're a veteran of, say, a Shava or whatever world boss they're doing, if they execute well, they can get pretty high on the ranking. They can even overtake people who were there from the beginning because of the effort they've put in. And a system that's rewarding effort by the player, rather than trying to just say, okay, here, you participated, here's your reward, is much better. And I feel overall, splitting a world boss into different types of events with stages that could be, kill this or defending or things that are not timed versus time, makes the system a lot more dynamic, a lot more interesting, and breathes a whole bunch of replayability just into this system. And that's something I want to implore to you, the developer, is making sure that we're stretching each space system to its wit's end. So that's why when we get to the end game, that being us, the player, regardless of whether it's non-seasonal or seasonal, we're getting the max out of it. So that's all I pretty much want to say in world bosses, and with that, we'll move over to the next item. This item is actually the Stagger system and the enhanced Affix system. I actually really have no comments here, but I have no negative comments here, I should say. I love what was done. I know I'm saying I love or I like, but this is because I really feel that lessons, for the most part, are being learned from the previous iterations of the game, and Diablo IV is really coming to its own, not just being another version of a previous game in the franchise, but it's really coming to its own, and all the lessons are being learned, and new things are being birthed that make sense. And I feel the Stagger system is great because it doesn't force us to think of CCs being a bad thing. It's how can we most effectively put Stagger on a world boss or a regular boss at the end of a dungeon and get the beneficial effect out of it. But we can't rely on that. It's not like we can go in like the old days with Witch Doctors and just keep something permanently CC'd and just kind of cheese the content. No. The world's going to make us work for it. The monsters are going to make us work for it. So we have to put in effort, and that effort will be validated through our actions and through our builds and our decisions, which is always a good thing. Again, the game should validate our effort, not just our time. And when it comes to the enhanced Affix system, that's something I adore. Because when I look at Diablo 3 and I see how when you get into higher level GRs where you could have 3 or 4 or 5 elite or champ packs, the game goes from an RPG to a platformer within seconds. And I feel, even though we've maybe accustomed to that as far as the player base is concerned, like that's not what the game should be. It should be about what the monster is versus just lopping on these affixes on top of the monster. So the example of the ballista and how the multi-shot affix just made it shoot 3, so there was less places to hide at range, and if you got up close to it and it went off, you were taking 3 hits, so you had to be really careful how you approached it. And probably even more scarier was the Fallen Shaman being able to res 3 grunts at one time, or a Fallen Shaman being able to res 3 other Fallen Shaman, and they res 3 grunts to themselves. So it can get, so even simple things, base level broad changes like this are stuff that I hope gets carried out throughout the entirety of Diablo 4, because when you do simple broad level changes that can have a lot of variable effects, like how the multi-shot affix works with a ballista very drastically different than with a Fallen Shaman, you get you birth a whole new set of dynamic gameplay, and the replayability is just inherently built in at that point, because you never know what you're going to get. And if you're working innately with the monster's abilities instead of just lopping on these affixes, they just get used to. You have to kind of treat every monster with a little bit more respect. You have to figure out what a monster's ability is and how it could be altered in the future, so you keep that in the back of your head and you start building basically a monster library. Start building your own version of Diablo monsters and where to find them kind of compendium. And you have to start really building that tribal knowledge of, like, oh god, like it's that monster, oh it's that affix, all right, I have to wait till my cataclysm is up as a druid, or I have the super duper lightning ping pong ability that the sorceress has, because that's the only thing I'm going to be able to use to kill that thing dead before it shoots enhanced affix off a couple of times, and then I'm just dead. I like that, and like I said, there's no negative comments here. I just wanted to make sure I touched on it, and I said that's what Diablo 4 should be doing more, Joe. Just bigger, broader, base level changes instead of trying to overcomplicate things and create false complexity. And with that, we're going to move on to the next item. Alright, the next item is quests. Now this is going to be a short one, because I liked how the quests look like for the main one with the drown and kid and all that. And I like how the interactions and when you went in the house and how that looked, and how the whole world and the environment interacted with you while you were doing quests. I feel it was great. Keep it up. The only thing I have to suggest is, because there's going to be people who are going to want to steamroll through the main storyline and not bother with the side quests. And then there's going to be the complete opposite, where there's going to be people who are going to want to do the main quests, and then after they're done with the main quests in that story, they're going to want to do all the side quests in that area. Giving an easy way to distinguish what's a side quest versus what's a main quest, and if things like repeatables come in later on during development for whatever reason, that there's an easy way to distinguish, and it would basically be differentiating the quest marker color. This is something that's done in WoW. Like real main storylines for the expansion are usually a darker orange, gold, like basically legendary exclamation point and question mark, versus a regular quest is a regular yellow question mark or exclamation point, versus a repeatable is a blue question mark or exclamation point. Now for Diablo, let's stick with colors that are more from us. So the main storyline, we could have a darker red question mark or exclamation point for when we turn stuff in. And that would be easy to, if it's red, usually make it dead. That would be good for the main storyline. For side quests, keep the cyan that's currently in the build. I think that would be a good way of distinguishing what the side quests are. And if repeatables come in, or even if it's just like a repeatable turn in, like convert a crafting material to another one, whatever it may be, use like a purple color. So that's why there's differences there. All the while keeping in colorblind mode, accessibility, and all that other alternative stuff that we as players often forget ourselves if we're not affected by it. But other than that, that's all I really have to mention on quests. I look forward to the main storyline, especially with Olaf and that pale guy, and what comes about. But I would say just keep that in mind. That's why people who want to experience the main quest and drill through it can, and people who want to experience everything, well, they know they're not missing anything. And with that, we're going to go on to the next item. Alright, this item is endgame dungeons. Now, unlike world bosses, where I feel is at the first layer of many possibilities of the system, endgame dungeons are the second level of the system itself, because you have dungeons and then you have endgame dungeons. And I like how you, the developers, showed us this broadening out of a system and adding another layer to the cake, another tier to the cake, so to speak. And when I think about in-game dungeons, when I reflect on them, kind of similar to how I reflected back on world bosses, putting myself a year or two into the future playing Diablo 4, I thought, well, yeah, I can see myself doing endgame dungeons. I know endgame dungeons are only a small part of the endgame strategy that is being developed for Diablo 4. But I was thinking, well, there are certain things that until we're shown, we the players can only assume that we're kind of losing out on a little bit. Now, the secret cow level in Diablo 3, we know pretty much that was put in there, Bardiche and all that kind of stuff. You put in queue, you go there, you have fun, kill lots of cows, moo, and you get some good old-fashioned peepools, and you go from there. The other one that's a little bit more, I'll say critical, is the vault. And the vault at the beginning was something that was really rare, and it couldn't really plan on ever really appearing. But now, with the puzzle ring being able to go there automatically, and goblin shrines when you do see them, fair chance more than not of getting a vault through one of the goblins. And the point that when you kill Greed, you get a boon of the Hoarder, and how the boon of the Hoarder kind of enables certain T16 builds. So there's actually a little bit more to it than just, oh, it's this fancy, weird golden land with goblins. No, like, there are some credible builds around the boon of the Hoarder, which you only get there, and certain items have gotten more use out of them because of the existence of the world and the boon of the Hoarder, and other items you get. So I was thinking, taking that, putting that to the side for a moment. Inevitably, with systems like this, designer intent versus player use, eventually we're going to get towards the lifespan where we're going to be doing close, if not max rank keys. Like we saw rank 15, and if we use that example of the max rank that we could possibly do, eventually we'll get to the point. But are we going to be using rank 10 keys for anything, or are we going to be using rank 5 keys for anything, or are we just going to be salvaging them because it's not really worth our time? Because, again, dungeons are rooted in the world, and we have to travel to them, so we have to use waypoints, mounts, we have to go to them. So we may only focus on in-game dungeons that are really around us at that particular point, if we have keys for them, or depending on how parties are set up with these keys, how that's figured out. We may only have a small amount of in-game keys that we're going to really do. So it may be like a thing like we just try to stock up on in-game keys throughout the week, and then we do them on Friday or Saturday when we can do them with our friends, or just do them solo if we're doing some kind of solo found league stuff. And I feel that in itself, where there's almost inevitably a narrowing of possible keys that we'll ever really take advantage of as we progress in power, I feel that kind of takes away from the system itself. And it's not that I feel every system has to be maximally utilized at any given point, but if there's a way to make sure the system isn't artificially, or I guess the better way of putting it, if we could figure out a way to make sure each system is being taken advantage of to its fullest extent, then I feel that's what we should do. So with that, I'm thinking, well, this would be a good time to bring crafting in for the first time in some of these examples. And what would that be? So you have an endgame dungeon key, and you're doing 14s and 15s at this point because you're trying to get basically your best gear. You're just trying to grind it out at this point. But you have a set of rank 9 and 10 keys, and you're kind of low in gold. What if you can go to a crafter, and the give and take, that's how this system would work, is the give part would be you'd be placing a random affix on a key. So the example was Lightning Pulse at BlizzCon. You had this giant rock that pulsated with lightning damage, and if you were close to it when it went off, you took a decent amount of damage. So what if you were going through, you had a rank, and you had that Lightning Pulse, and then you got another affix that was randomly put on that was dual bosses. So at the end of this dungeon, you had to fight 2 bosses. You're thinking, oh, great, whatever. But the thing you would take from the key, the thing that you would be able to actually choose to put on the key would be, all monsters drop 20% more gold, 30% more gold. So you could take your rank 9s and 10s that you could pretty much steamroll. You can make them a little bit harder as a cost to being able to turn them into gold runs, item runs. You know, you could have 5 or 10% chance of an item when it drops it upgrades in rarity. Mythic items would probably be an exception to that, all considering. Probably be a special case to that rule. But you see where I'm going with this. It would allow you to not just focus on your highest rank keys, and that's what you want to push either solo with a group, and kind of disregard and salvage all the rest. It would make you look at those mid-level rank keys in a new light. Be like, you know, I like doing that particular dungeon, but it's such a weak rank key. It's like I could blow through it, so it's like, what's the point? But if you could turn these runs into gold runs or item runs or other things that could be thought of by you, the developer, or even the community, it extends the life of the endgame dungeon system. It gives multiple purposes to multiple rank keys, and it allows us, the player, to have a little bit more control over what we want to do on our day-to-day activity. And again, at the end of the day, that's what I'm focusing on, is broadening out each system to make sure that we're maximizing it to its fullest effect. And I think in Diablo 4, while the endgame dungeon is already a second tier on that cake with dungeons, I think we can kind of consider this crafting element a third tier. You know, when those competitive people, those endgame pushers get there, they still have something to do, but it's still something for the day-to-day casual and novice player to take advantage of as well. And I think that's, at the end, what I'm trying to get at. Just be able to take advantage of each system and maximize it to its fullest. And with that, we're going to move on to the next topic. Alrighty, we're over to the second main point, which is classes and their parts. Now, I generally don't really have anything negative to say about the classes themselves. I don't have any really big sticking points for each individual class. Only slightly, maybe the sorceress has a little bit of resource issues, but then again, anything with really heavy resource, like whether it's mana or arcane power for the wizard or stuff like that, it takes a little bit to get used to. And how much could we really get used to a class that's in development on a demo that's 20 minutes long, so it's maybe not an issue in the long run. But other than that, I like how there's some chances that are being taken, especially with the Barbarian Arsenal system, giving the Barbarian 2 extra gear slots in the form of the weapons, and how big experiments are being done. How there's a risk of, okay, we're going to give the Barbarian 2 extra slots, and we're going to make our best to try to make sure that the other classes' power are equal to that, and make sure all the decisions don't matter there, and there's not everything's still balanced. I like how this overall mechanic when it comes to chill and freezing with the sorcerer. So all your frost skills work towards it. You just don't have to. You're not forced to choose Nova. You can use Blizzard, you can use Frostbolt, you can use Frost Nova, you can use Frozen Orb. Anything that can generate chill can eventually freeze an enemy and then or create Stagger and go from there. And then lastly, the Druid with the transformations being from what skill you were using to the skill you go to next, the transformation being automatic. So it's not something you have to manage, like stancing with warriors and WoW, that kind of stuff like that. It may seem like it's taking away an interactive element, but the interactive element is through the talents and skills and items of timing your transformations and what beneficial effects you get when you do transform. And I feel for Diablo 4 that's probably the best way of going forward. So overall, when it comes to the classes themselves, I really don't have any issues, and I'm just kind of left here twiddling my thumbs going, what are the other 2 classes, and when can we see more examples of all the skills, because that's essentially what I'm looking forward to. Overall, when it comes to items and item progressions and talents and skills, I like where we are. I do have some concerns, and we'll hit those individually, but I generally like the path that's being taken, and I want to emphasize that I like the path that's being taken with Diablo 4, and I just want to make sure that when we try to call out and maybe give a possible solution to, guides us to an easier to understand, a clearer to understand, and most importantly, a broadening of the game, and making sure the game is getting out of the way as being a grand facilitator instead of being a hindrance. So that, we're going to move on to the first item of this section. Alright, so we're on to the first item for this section, which is the item progression itself. Now at BlizzCon, it was very easily shown to us. It was normal, magic, rare, sets, legendaries, mythics. And it's a very clear item progression. It's a very easy one to understand. Normal magic, your entry level pieces. Rare, that's where you start filling and you're filling out your character. You're able to target, talents or skill point upgrades if possible. Your general crit, chance, cooldown, etc., etc. And then legendaries and sets is where you start really building out unique. You start getting your build proper on, and then later on in the end game, if you're lucky enough to get a mythic, that can be totally rebuild defining. Because if it doesn't work for your current build, but it can work for a new build, well then, there you go. I feel everything that they're doing with sets being stepping stones, and how hopefully they'll be more utility based than ultimate fantasy based in that regards, and how the goal is at endgame to be all legendary out, so you have the maximum amount of legendary powers, but also the maximum amount of skill altering powers on you is a great outlook. And then, like how I said with mythics, and I feel the tagline for mythics should be making impossible builds possible, because if each mythic does that or has the possibility of doing that, that really gives that wow moment. That really, when one drops, it's like you spam it in clan chat 10 times. You go on Twitter with a screenshot, like, look what I got, and you're just so hyped and excited for getting that item. And I feel that's very clear, very easy to discern within the game progression path. If we were to somehow make sure rares are almost equal power to legendaries, and add rune words back, and add in other things from previous Diablo games that for their time were great. Extended the loot hunt, gave you something to shoot for during those times. Back then, it was great. But going forward in Diablo 4, I feel what has been laid out in front of us should be the way forward. Because, again, I'm gonna hit this nail as many times as it's clear. It's easy to understand. And the difficult choices that we'll have to make shouldn't be in just the rarity of the item, but should be what the item does for us. And I feel too many people are just saying, well, rares should be stronger. Why? Because it's on the past. We're moving forward. Diablo 4 is going to be its own unique entry into this franchise. It's to borrow some elements from the previous ones, but that's because they worked. And to say, well, how would rares be? To have an extra affix? Well, aren't we then specializing rares into almost not being rares? They're becoming their own unique deal. So there's a really fine tuning balancing here, and this is where we can almost see the beginning, the first instance of what I always say about Diablo 3 and now Diablo 4 is that old game systems are on a spider web, and if you pluck at one string on the web, it reverberates throughout the rest of the web, and it could potentially negatively or beneficially to extremes other systems. And I would rather just keep what's there and go with that, because what if rares do become equal almost in power to legendaries, and it turns out there are some builds that you only need rares? Well, that may be fine and dandy because you're walking around, basically skills don't change, like the staff of Fractured Flame that splits your fireball into 3 fireballs, but you just have this rare staff that just super powers fireball. You're basically running around with the same fireball from level 1 to max rank. Yeah, it does a lot of damage, but there's no change. You're not evolving your character. You're not evolving your skills. You're not doing anything. It would be boring. And I get for some people that may be the thing for you, but it's definitely not for everybody. I know it's definitely not for me. And at the end, it kind of breeds a dual itemization scheme, similar to what we were dealing with in Diablo 3 with Legacy of Nightmares and set items. And how usually, if there was an LON build, especially if it was part of the 4-man meta that was strong, that was what was chosen, and nothing else was used as far as sets. Or if the set was stronger, the LON variant wasn't used at all. And this constant seesaw back and forth, and developers having to spend time on balancing these two things. While yes, it's nice having more builds, it should be at the broader level of the skills and just the natural item progression. Again, from rare to set to legendary to mythics. Because if we have to deal with another situation where it's like, is this rare strong as a legend? I have no idea. I have to go to a third-party website and basically sim it out. I don't want that. I don't think a majority of the player base wants that. We just want to be able to easily know that when we get a piece, it works. It's an upgrade, and the hard decision is, how do we incorporate it? How do we incorporate our skills with it? How do we change our playstyle around it? And potentially, do we have to change a skill out to more to better take advantage of that legendary that we find, rather than I have to change my talents around to take advantage of this rare and sim it out and spend a half an hour on a website because of everything that it does and measure everything out. So I know that's maybe my first real controversial opinion compared to others, but I know that's my opinion. And I feel, and that's why I feel the line of progression that was given to us is probably the best overall for Diablo 4 and the overall health of the game itself. And with that, we're going to move on to the next topic. Alright, item number 2 is Legendary Sets and Mythics. Now, I've touched a lot on these, so it will make the section a little bit quicker than I initially planned it. And we'll start a little bit out of order. So, again, sets, reiterating for the 3rd, 5th, 10th time. Love how they're a stepping stone, that's how they're being planned out. Hopefully they'll be considered more of a general utility versus trying to fulfill the ultimate fantasy of a class which not targeting skills, but trying to having a broad effect over as many skills as possible, like targeting projectile-based skills rather than just frostbolt or fireball or stuff like that. Hopefully they're more utility-based and will allow more legendaries to be socketed into the non-set item spots on our character when we do get those sets and we do get those legendaries. So more of the items we find we can make more use of, which plays into another philosophy and we're trying to I'm working with in this feedback is items only have value when the item drops, the player assesses it into one of two things. Does it help my current build, or does it help enable another build of equal or greater power? And if it doesn't fall into one of those two categories, then the item is effectively useless or functionally useless, because while it may be a great item in a vacuum, in all practicality, not so much. So broadening the purpose of sets, which allows the broadening of legendaries that can possibly be used with those said sets, is great, because now more items you find are just inherently more valuable because they're more useful. Moving over to Mythics, like I said, another line Mythics should be making impossible builds possible, and well, that's because they have 4 affixes. They're basically a set's worth of changes on one item, and when you think about it, except the Barbarian, which has 2 extra legendary properties because they can have 2 one-handers and 2 two-handers on them. Everyone else has 10 legendary powers maximum, taking the one out that would normally be there if this was a regular legendary versus a mythic, has 3 more on top of that. So you're increasing the overall legendary power count from 10 to 13. That's an almost 30% increase in the legendary powers available to you and your character. So if you can't make a new equal, if not more powerful build, or make a build that would normally be impossible because you don't have that 11th or 12th affix, or legendary power I should say, then I would say go back to the drawing board and make them just that. Because if they're not that caliber of an item when they drop, where we get really uber excited, even if we can't take advantage of it, but we just understand how awesome the item is while we're playing, then it diminishes what mythics are. So make sure that happens. So that's sets and mythics. Legendaries are the last category, and I'm going to touch on them briefly, but I have a little bit of an issue with them. And it's not in any inherent issue of what they are. I mean, legendaries have legendary powers and all that kind of fun stuff, but they aren't really evolving. I mean, you can look at the mirror ball, an offhand for the wizard, which simply states, your magic missile casts 1 or 2 extra magic missiles. So instead of shooting off 1 magic missile, you're shooting off 2 or 3. You look at the Staff of Fractured Flame in Diablo 4, your fireball now shoots three now shoots three fireballs that deal X percent damage of the original fireball. So when you look at Diablo 3 Legendary and Diablo 4 Legendary, it kind of the same. We're not evolving the concept of what it means to be a legendary itself. And I feel at the same time, especially when you drill down onto skill specific legendary powers, the specificity can almost be a hindrance to the item. And a great example in Diablo 3 is you're running around the Shadow and Pale build. And it would be amazing if somehow, some way, you could just fit a Lord Greenstone fan in there, because it's an awesome legendary power to have while you're leveling a Demon Hunter. But if you're trying to fit it into that Impale build, it's too specific. And the Carly's Point works with Impale, and the Carly's Point works with Fan of Knives, and they're great individually. And even if you could figure out a way to put the Carly's Point into the cube and get rid of Dawn, then you have this whole cooldown issue you have to work around with. So you're losing damage, and you have the Greenstone's fan in there. You can able to do more AoE damage. But this build just kind of fails, kind of falls on itself, trying to work. So going from there to Diablo 4, what I'm proposing is another avenue for crafting to be involved. The second way we can bring crafting in. And it would work only with skill-specific legendary powers, and it would be predetermined by you, the developer. Because there could be instances where, again, using the Staff of Fractured Flame as an example, where, Fireball is similar to Frostbolt, is also similar to Lightning Spear, but we don't necessarily want to include Meteor in that because of power Meteor, and or because Meteor has this AoE component after it lands. It's just a tiny bit too different than the other three, so we're not going to include that. It would also increase the excitement factor when you find a legendary item, because you're like, okay, I know I can take advantage of that now, but what other skills can work with this? So you go to a crafter in town, you put it in a slot for a crafter, and you can see all the possible skills that you could essentially replace and see what you could do with that item. Now the items would be predetermined, just how you're doing them now, so I'm not changing that. You would only functionally be adding a crafter to possibly replace a skill on those items. And some items may have no replacements at all. The legendary power may be too specific. It may not be able to work with any other skill from a particular class, and that's okay. Because the excitement factor is getting the legendary item, and then there's a second excitement factor. I'm like, well, if it can do this for X skill, how many other skills could this work for? And then you start thinking, well, if I change Fireball to Lightning Spear, oh god, I got 3 Lightning Spears. What if I pick these talents and I work with my skills to really lock down groups and shoot out Lightning Spears like they're nothing, and I just go through with that? Especially if you throw Mythics involved into that when you get them, if you're lucky enough to get them drop. It turns the Legendaries from just being these, granted, really unique things, it turns them into, it evolves them, that is the better word, it evolves them into more dynamic build enablers, and you get more life out of them, because drop rates are going to be much lower than what we're used to from Diablo 3 and Diablo 4. So if it enables us to extend the lifetime of a legendary item itself and get more use out of it, especially if we're going from one particular build to another build, and we can extend the life of it and not be crippled every time we go, say, we go from a fire sorceress to a cold and then to a lightning and vice versa. I feel that is a great way of, again, going back to basics, broadening out the systems and giving the player a little bit more agency over what we do, but ultimately you, the developer, will be able to choose, should this item even have a choice of different skills? If not, fine. If so, you determine what it is, and that's part of the unwrapping, that's part of the discovery and the identification of an item. It's like, oh man, this is great for me now, but how can I make use of this even more so in the future? And I feel that's how Legendaries should be aimed. So with that, we're going to go over to the next topic. This item deals with Ancients specifically. And this is where I get a little bit more of a leg up compared to other members in the community that have already done their feedback, because with the system update that was put out by David Kim, it was noted that they were going to go back to the drawing board, it seems like, with Ancients and trying to revisit what the purpose is and how they're going to be in with Diablo 4. And this is totally where I know I'm coming off as smug, and I'll admit that up front. But I could see why Ancients are presenting a problem. Because when you look at what Ancients, the original purpose of Ancients were in Diablo 3, they were essentially a band-aid fix to prolong the gear hunt, to give players something to shoot for, which is completely fine. I'm not saying it was a wrong decision. And then that was expanded on with primals, essentially. And for Diablo 3, just how in Diablo 3 I view that Ancients and Primals were a good thing for the game, just how uniques and powerful rares and rumors were good for Diablo 2. I could see how taking something that essentially was a fix and trying to incorporate it into a new game where all these things are thought of, and it can be kind of hard to kind of tweak it in, because as we, the players, we're only left to speculate what the original purpose of Ancients was, because it was never really shown, there was never an example item, it really wasn't talked about. So an ancient legendary would have 2 legendary properties. It kind of takes away from the shininess of a mythic, because they have 4, so you're kind of shortening the gap between legendary and mythic, but you're bridging in a big gap between a legendary and an ancient, especially when there's only 10 item slots, and having that extra one could be almost a 9 to 10% power increase depending on what had happened to roll. And it seems kind of forced, and it seems bland, it seems stale. It seems like, oh, we're just putting on another legendary power. It's power creep all over again. So when I think about Ancients and how, again, in Diablo 3 they serve the purpose along with primals, but in Diablo 4, again, broadening the base systems, I'm going to bring in crafting again for the 3rd time, because I feel we can carry on what Ancients and Primals along with the Mystic and the Canized Cube, and we can carry on the legacy of those D3 systems, but in smaller currency items or just crafting items, whatever it's going to be called. Carry on the legacy of those systems, but just in a different way. And we can get away from those moments in Diablo 3 where it's like, oh my god, I felt a really good Carly's point. It rolled really good on the damage range. It rolled 6% attack speed, but it rolled with attack speed. Even rolled with percent damage and dexterity, and I have a Ramanani, so I can put a socket on it, and I can re-roll whatever I need to for the dex value. But it's not Agent. And what Ancients tried to do is extend the loot hunt, but inevitably the player felt bad when they didn't get an Ancient, and that was negative reinforcement. It was, yeah, great, you got this really good item. Now you have to find an ancient item that's just as good as that regular item, which is inevitably, on average, 10 times harder. And at that point, we're not validating the player effort of finding that item, we're just validating their time, which I think are two big no-nos for any game, not just Diablo 4. And I feel like we shouldn't be worrying about rarity so much, per se. So, again, going back to what the possible solution is, being with crafting and continuing the legacy of what ancients were, what primals were, and the Canoni's Cube and the Mystic, is just a whole bunch of currency items of different power scales and such. So your low-level crafting items could be one item can reroll an Affix, bringing the legacy of Canoni's Cube. Another low-level power item could be increasing Affix by 30%. Again, bringing the legacy of ancients themselves to an item that you can use on any legendary. So when you find that really good item, you know it's a really good item. You know you don't have to try to find that same item just in a higher rarity. So we get off this treadmill of constantly side grading the same item, which can lead to very quick burnout over the course of a season and keeps people engaged with the game. Because now we're not just looking for the same item, we're looking for any item and being able to augment it with these currency items, crafting items, whatever we call them. There can be another item that can increase the legendary power to its maximum. Kind of bringing the legacy of what it meant to get a primal item in Diablo 3, kind of bringing it over, albeit in a lesser form, in Diablo 4. And then there could be higher power items. And the reason for this will be, I'll make apparent later on. You can have a higher power item of... You can have an item that boosts the legendary power by 10, 20, 30%. But a random affix on that item decreases by a certain amount. And this is a give and take system. This is something I came up with in the Development Hell 4 article, but it's not new to action RPGs. It's basically a give and take system. You're basically defiling an item. You're taking away from one item to gain an advantage in another, and it brings interesting choices for when you get towards middle and late game. Like, how much can you lose and still be effective? Not everyone would take advantage of these, but for the people who want to have some risk and reward factor, this item would be for them. And on that same beam of risk versus reward, you can have items that increase all affixes by a certain percent, but the item becomes unrepairable, and by extension, untradeable. And this is for those really high-end pushers, competitive people. If there's a competitive element, I hope there is a competitive element in Diablo 4. And this is for like the time, like it's the last week, or even the last day, or even the last hour of a season, and a person has exhausted every element. They have maxed out everything they can, and they're rank 2, and they really want that rank 1. And they have one or two of these items, and they're like, well, either I use it now and I get that rank 1, or I just settle for rank 2. So they figure out what pieces of gear they could potentially live without if they die too many times and the piece of gear breaks and then disappears, or they would get the most benefit of, and they use that item on that piece of gear, and they just roll the dice. And if they succeed, may honor and glory be upon them. If they fail, well, they knew they give it their best effort with the items that they had, and it wasn't just because strictly RNG with items that were dropped for them. And it wasn't also because the weapon or the offhand, which are probably the two crucial elements to a build, any build in Diablo itself. They happen to get a really good one, but it was only a legendary or an ancient where someone else just happened to get lucky with primal. So doing this brings back a little bit of fairness to the competitive element of the game. That again, hopefully, is there. So essentially, even though I'm saying get rid of ancients as far as a rarity, the example of items continue the concept of what ancients were trying to do, and further bolster the crafting system and the crafting examples that I've given, because I feel crafting should be a bigger part in Diablo 4, but not through items or weapons that we could craft, but through the augmentation and building out our gear, building out our weapons, and such like that. I feel that's where crafting should be geared towards. And having different classes of low power crafting currency items like rerolling and affix versus, hey, I'm gonna maximize legendary power by certain. I'm gonna increase my legendary power by a certain amount, but I'm gonna take a chance on randomly decreasing an affix on that same piece. Can help with the training aspect of the game, because now you say, okay, well, we're not going to allow people to trade low power items for high power items because there's a stark difference there. If you had a high power class item, you could trade for other high power class items, and you could trade low power class items for another low class power items. So it's actually so it's opening up trade, but you're saying no. You cannot trade X for Y. You can only trade X for another X class item and only Y for a Y class item. Because I feel trading with the 3 bucket method has the potential to be a little bit too restrictive, and having this kind of item class would make trading more feasible. And again, even though this started with ancients who went to continuing their legacy, continuing ancients and primals and other systems through the crafting items I've shown, and I talked about trading, this is a perfect demonstration of how we're talking about the strand on the spider web of ancients and how it can reverberate through other systems. And if we don't think about it as players when we suggest these solutions, or if you, the developers, most likely are fully aware of this, we're just making kind of singular vacuum solutions that are great again in that vacuum, but when you think about overall systems, kind of fall apart. So that was the one and probably only tangent within one item I will go through, but that's because it was a perfect demonstration of the spider web and shown how it could positively affect other aspects that are being trying to be done in Diablo 4 itself. And with that, we will move on to the next item. Alright, we're going to talk about a system that I have a strong opinion, or, well, a strong concern about. The concern is based around the best information I have from what I'm referring from all the VODs and assumptions being based off the demo, which I understand through XYZ, it's not what's being actively developed on. It was, a branch of development that was shot off, was bug tested, just gotten ready for the audience, and things may have been locked down extra more. So we may have seen the skills, but, does this give overall flavor to let us know the players, what they worked on, how far they are? And it's definitely not representative of the final project at release. So with all that stated, with all disclaimer, that I understand that, there's 2 main concerns I have. Basically, it's the overall skill point allocation through the leveling experience and how that can ultimately deter experimentation for a class. And the second concern I have is the lack of evolution of skills. So the first part about skill allocation and their overall experimentation, or maybe the hindrance of it, is it seems like you have to put a skill point into a skill to unlock it. To unlock it and put it on your action bar. It seems like you're not going to have all skills unlocked. And you'll be able to experiment with or change on a whim. So, in the beginning of your leveling experience as a sorceress, you may pick, Fireball and Frostbolt, just so you have a free cast and a high damage single target. You may pick Meteors to have a bigger AoE damage ability. You may pick Teleport for mobility. You may pick Nova for bigger AoE damage ability, so on and so forth. So you put points into all those, and by mid-game, you're like, and I haven't really found any real purpose for Nova, so I stopped putting points in that after the first one. I got an item for Lightning Spear, so I stopped putting points in the Fireball. Even though I put 4 or 5 points into it, it kind of hurts that I don't have those points to use now, because again, skill point allocation is permanent. I at least found out early enough, or so I thought, or so I think, of switching over from Fireball to Lightning Spear. And I put 1 point into Teleport, but you know what? I got really good with the dodge mechanic, and I feel I can get by with just that. So, as you're experimenting with skills, primarily just to feel what they are and just kind of get the whole experience of what a class is, because a class is its skills. It's the theme of the class, but at the base level, it's its skills. So as you're experimenting from mid-game to end-game, where you're getting hopefully more legendaries because you're in end-game content, you're in end-game dungeons, world bosses, etc., etc., you can wind up with a hodgepodge, jack of all trades but master of none situation where you have 2/3 of your skills unlocked, but none of them are really high-powered enough, and it kind of brings up a question of how good is that? Because we don't know what the difficulty scaler is. We don't know how the difficulty scaler is even going to function. And without that known, how many points do we have to put into a skill for it to be effective at endgame, at a minimal level? Is it going to be 1 or 2 points put in, 4 or 5 points, 8 or 9 points, or how many points? We don't know that. And I don't know if the developers know that. They may not be at that point, and that's fine, because we're early in development. But it's a major concern, because if you think about that, at the end game result where you're basically a master, you're a jack of all trades with a master of none, the game gets incrementally harder because your skills at a base level aren't doing as much damage, aren't doing as much CC, or the CC chance is lower. So your skills are fundamentally holding you back, and no amount of respeccing your talents or swapping out legendaries is going to fix the base skill, because the base skill is where all the percentages work off of. A smaller number can never be made equal to a bigger number through items if it's the base value. So I feel that's a really big linchpin of really the whole class design of Diablo 4. And it inevitably puts the player in a mental state of, if this happens once to them, they're always going to be in the state of, alright, I have to make the safe decisions. And if they're going to make the safe decisions, they're not going to experiment as much. Which means that only the skills that have the maximum amount of effectiveness are going to be the ones that are going to be chosen. And the legendaries that work around those skills are the only ones that are going to have any kind of value. Because again, value is not determined by the item itself, it is how it fits into the current build the player is playing, or if it enables an equal, if not more powerful build. And if after rolling a character 2 or 3, this whole min-maxing philosophy gets involved, or where people are just putting the minimum amount of points to get by, so they're storing up points as they level, or as they're getting them through quests, or they're storing up tomes, not because it's not for any beneficial reason, but because they're afraid of making a mistake. Then the game is not being a grand facilitator. It's not broadening out the base of the base systems. It's being a grand hindrance to the player. It's making decisions all too hard, and it's getting in the way. So that's the first issue. The second issue is the skills aren't evolving. And I think this is what I was most disappointed in. Because when everyone was going against Diablo Immortal, I really loved what the team in Diablo Immortal was doing with skills. For the first time in what felt forever, there were true skill interactions that didn't involve sets, didn't involve runes of those skills, didn't involve legendary powers. It was just the native skills interacting with each other. And the perfect example was the Ice Crystal and the Ray of Frost interaction, where the Ice Crystal was placed in the area by the wizard, and then the wizard would cast Ray of Frost into the Ice Crystal, and then it would fracture, hitting multiple enemies around that Ice Crystal. And it was such a breath of fresh air to see that, to see skill interactions in such a way. I was going, I hope something similar is being done for Diablo 4, if Diablo 4 is a thing, which at the time, that's what we were all thinking. Or something, or a similar system, but unique to Diablo 4 is being developed. And when I didn't see that inherently, where the lion's share of the customizability of skills was being offloaded off the skills themselves to legendary items and mythic items, and to a lesser extent rares and such, I was disappointed, because again, skills are the core of a class. So the first layer of customizability of a class should be with the skills themselves. And this was done with Diablo 3. We had runes. Even though the runes were tied to elements and that brought up itemization problems and usefulness of said runes themselves because of it, at least the skills had the first priority of how they evolved. And there isn't even that, it seems, with Diablo 4. Yeah, you could say talents kind of do that, but talents are more like a more robust version of passives, you could say. I wouldn't say they evolve the skills. They dramatically change how the skill works. So that's the second issue I have. And it's probably the only real point I was ever disappointed in Diablo 4 with what I saw. So, how can we rectify both these situations? How can we still have the skill point system still feel like your active choice to put a skill point into a skill matters, but not feel punishing if you happen to get a legendary or in worst case a mythic and you can't switch your build over and you're faced, do I have to really reroll this character just to take advantage of this mythic? Especially in a worst case scenario, ultimate worst case scenario. You have all the items because you've been at least smart enough to know that this could happen. And it's 2 weeks before the season ends. And you know it takes roughly a week and a half to level a character, because we don't even know how long it's going to take to level a character. We don't even know that. So you know it takes roughly a week and a half to roll a character. There's 2 weeks left in the season. And you're going, is it worth my time to reroll a character, perfectly allocate the skill points, do the talents, transfer all the items I can transfer over, and then play the game? And then play the last 2 or 3 days of the season and try to get that rank 1? Or is it just not worth my time? And in that case, even though we're talking about skill points, it makes the feeling of getting that mythic item, of making an impossible build possible, it detracts so much hype and excitement of getting that item. And again, this is an example of the spider web and how tight these systems are. So the first part of the solution is all skills should be available to each for each class. This should be available, and whether you unlock them all at the beginning, or you know how left click, right click, 1, 2, 3, 4 how like each of the beginning levels unlock the next one going down. So you're not all the skills aren't thrusted upon a new player, and everyone's going, how do I do this? And people don't accidentally pick a spender or two in the beginning, going, how does this work? You know, like no, you pick a skill that's free, pick a skill that's a spender, and you generally ease somebody into it. So that's what it should be. You know, generally ease a player in, but have all skills attainable and usable. The second point is all skills should inherently increase in power over time, but your skill points will also increase the power of items, not items, those skills as well. And the easiest way to explain this is the demo had a level cap of 40, and now this could change, most likely will change. That's what was said at the BlizzCon panel, but we're going to work with it for example's sake here. So every other level, so level 2, level 4, level 6, so on and so forth, every skill goes up 1 tier of power. So by the time you hit level 40, every skill has gone up 20 tiers of power. Easy enough to understand. So that's why by the time you hit level 40, every skill is at the minimal amount of power a player needs to do content at that level. It may not be enough to do endgame content like in-game dungeons or other endgame systems, but the day-to-day activity of the overworld is attainable. World bosses, while hard, are attainable, but the endgame stuff is not. And the way skill points would work is every time you put a skill point into a skill, you add another tier of power to it. So for sake of example, say the maximum amount of points you could put into a skill was 10. So you're adding 10 tiers of power to the 20, so now you have 30 tiers of power. So to make this easier, if you max out a skill, that skill is 150 times, is 150% powerful. Essentially, it's 50% more powerful than any other skill that's just at the base level. And that's a good percentage difference, especially if we're talking about bringing the number smaller, Diablo 4 compared to Diablo 3. That's a sizable chunk, especially if that's just the base level number that's then going to get worked through modifiers and other legendary powers that are available. And so that's just for the stat allocation issue. To handle the skill evolution, when you put 10 points into a skill, you would then unlock that skill's mastery choice. It could be 2 choices, it could be 3, it could be whatever the developers feel comfortable actually trying to do. Because if there's going to be 20 skills per class, 5 skills, 5 classes times 20 is 100, and then you have to come up with even just 2 masteries. That's 200 masteries. That's a lot. That's a lot to ask for. So it doesn't have to be a lot. And these masteries would just be simple tweaks. So for an example, for a lightning spear could be shock collars. The first enemy lightning spear hits, it basically wraps itself around the neck of that enemy, or whatever may be the neck of that enemy, and it just periodically shocks the hell out of that one enemy. So it loses the multiple enemies, but it stays on one, and it shocks the hell out of it. So it's a small change. Another example would be Meteor Mastery Impact. The meteor comes in very quick, you almost don't see it, and it impacts and it craters the ground around it, stunning enemies for 2-3 seconds. So now it's not just a damage ability, it has a little bit of CC involved in it. Again, just simple changes. But if we go into an example, say over here you have a group of 4 or 5 goatmen, and over here you have one badass elite. As a sorcerer, you know you don't want to mess around with, you don't really want to get too close if you can avoid it. And you're stuck somewhere in the middle. For ease of this example, we're going to work with 3 skills. We're going to work with Blizzard, Meteor, and Lightning Spear. And the Blizzard is not going to have any mastery to it. So we're really going to dumb this down to just really how we're affecting Lightning Spear and Meteor in this example, to really show how small changes on skills evolving them through the mastery can make big differences, especially when we incorporate other examples from previous topics that I've gone over. So normally, you probably want to throw Blizzard on the elite while hitting it with Meteor and getting just close enough to this group and throw a Lightning Spear on it so we can go between the 4 or 5 of them and try to kill them after 2 or 3 casts while dealing with this elite. And you're probably going to have to do a fair bit of kiting. It's not the safest way of handling the situation, but it's what you got with what you chose. Now, say you have the Mastery Impact for the Meteor, and you have the Mastery of Shock Collars for the Lightning Spear. Now, it could totally change your view on things. You would still throw Blizzard on the elite, but now that it's frozen, it's not doing anything, you go around just throw the Shock Collar Lightning Spear on it, and then you know it's dealing damage. You don't have to stick around there, you don't have to cast a Meteor on it, and then you can just graduate towards the pack of grunts, throw Meteor on them, deal damage, and stun them, so you can, in a more safe way, kite both groups until you kill them all. Now, if we incorporate the fact that since we're adding Mastery as an end-all be-all to the skill point allocation, well, in Gear, we're now have the ability to add a rank via Gear, and we can target talents through Gear. What if we were able to actually target masteries through Gear? What if there was an affix that said lightning grant lightning spear mastery arrow, which would be the other choice in the talent tree. And that mastery arrow would be that it essentially turns lightning spear into a skill shot that you can actually aim your lightning spear at a specific enemy, and then it would start its rotation around killing enemies at a range. But since you chose the Shock Collar, it does both of them. So now it's a skill shot that you're choosing to Shock Collar that one specific enemy. So going back to the example, you can get much further away from the elite and skill shot through the mastery of arrow lightning spear onto the elite, and because you chose the mastery of Shock Collar, it sticks on the elite periodically dealing lightning damage. And since you have the mastery impact still on Meteor, stunning this group with the Meteor and dealing AoE damage. Now if we go another layer further with the first, the second crafting example with Legendaries, being able to target specific skills on them and being able to switch them out, again, the developer choosing when that's appropriate, when it isn't, what skills are appropriate for the legend item and which aren't, if at all. That Staff of Fractured Flame, what if you could turn that from Fireball into Lightning Spear? So we go back, so this is the end-all be-all example of, we go back here, you now can get much further away from both packs. Your skill shooting lightning arrow to the elite, except now you're shooting 3 lightning spears at range at this elite. All 3 stay on the neck of this enemy and shock it the fuck to hell, and may just run around it. And that allows you to now, instead of just constantly casting Blizzard on this pack, you can now focus Blizzard on this pack and smack it with Blizzard, and if one of them happens to live, you finish it off with a lightning spear. In each one of these examples, it demonstrates how the gameplay, how your choices and decisions change this one example. And again, we were only working with 3 skills. Only 2 had these masteries on them. And how we were working with the other masteries through targeting, through gear, affixes, just how they demonstrated we were able to target skill ranks and talent points. So it's not totally out of question that we could target the masteries through gear as well, which ups the itemization game as well. So that's a net benefit there, customizability. as well as the final element here of if we're able to switch skills on skill-based legendary properties, how that further emphasizes the choices we've made. But all those things, from the skill power, from being able to choose the skill on the legendary skill power, to targeting that mastery on a piece of gear, it targets the skill itself. It puts the skill front and center. And it makes our decisions on what skills we pick matter. We're not, and by me, it makes it so it unburdens a little bit, not fully, not by a long shot, but it takes some of the burden that legendaries carry to really alter these skills that we place on it as players, and that you, the developer, ultimately have to decide upon when you're creating these legendary items. And it kind of breeds an atmosphere where there's a little bit of ebb and flow, where it's like, okay, I didn't really put any points into Frostbolt when I was leveling, but I got a mythic for Frostbolt, or that can really change Frostbolt around. So while I don't have any points into it, at least it's base level. At least Frostbolt is still functionally useful at the level cap. And through getting tomes, I can up it. But it's not, I'm not working in the basement compared to other skills that I have maxed out. And it makes it so when a mythic drops or a really good legendary drops, even if I could change the skill in it, if it doesn't work with the build I have because it just changes too much of what my current build is and isn't really useful. And again, if the skill that I would use it for is in the basement as far as damage numbers are concerned, that legendary item is useless because it doesn't have a value to me. It doesn't matter how good it is in a vacuum. If it has no value to me, then it's going to get salvaged. That's just the nature of the game. So it extends the life of legendaries that drop, or even just rare items. And it feels weird to say, yeah, it extends the life of rares, because I don't want rares to be really a thing in an item progression game. But I will admit it extends the life of rares too. Because if you're able to target masteries, as well as talents and runes, and just general things, it extends the usefulness of all items up and down the progression scale. So that's why I feel, even if I'm totally wrong about the unlocking, you need a point to unlock a skill. And even if skill point tomes and skill point rewards from side quests, or even main quests, come quickly enough that any wrong decision, quote unquote, can be rectified easily enough within the span of a couple of days to a week or two. I still feel skills need to evolve at a base level, and that's where the base level of evolution should be. Skills should be afforded the first layer of evolution, and you have your skills, and then as soon as you have your first layer of evolution, it's a totally new tier on the cake, and then you have your talents, then you have your items. It just broadens out, again, broadening out base systems rather than just building new ones artificially that may have bad interactions later, because again, spiderweb could have bad vibrations down the line. So this was a longer section, but I felt it was more important. And this was admittedly probably the 6th time recording this item itself, but I felt it needed to be done. And if I'm completely batshit wrong, fine. But I did it anyways. Stupid. And with that, we're going to move on to the next item. Alrighty, and the last item I want to talk about for this section in particular is trading. Now, I like how trading is going to be coming back a little bit more in Diablo 4 compared to Diablo 3. It'll make finding legendaries, albeit even though I suggest, the ability to customize skills and skill specific legendary powers, and with items being able to target the mastery skills, which is again a new concept.
along with all the new crafting items in lieu of having an ancient rarity itself to alter items. There can still be those cases that either you're playing with a friend or you're playing by yourself and the item happened to drop that you know for yourself is it very valuable, but you know for a friend that you're playing with, very much well could be. So uh, there is a need there, and I think since we've gone so long, and again now that we're in a more modern era of games where we kind of min-max everything, we kind of focus on the efficiency of everything for better or worse, whether we really want to or not. It's always front and center in our minds. So, with that, the three bucket idea uh, isn't necessarily a new one, but it's one that I think is a good uh, part, a good large part of, say, the equation. Having items that are basically that never basically be bound to you. The concept of binding to your soul, or from WoW, or however you want to explain it. So having first bucket being always tradable, the second bucket being BOT, which is essentially bind on trade, and how many times an item can be traded in that fashion is up for debate. And then having items that can never be traded, which would usually be reserved for either items that uh, directly give power, such as skill tomes, I hope, won't be tradable because that's literally trading power at that point, as well as mythics, because as the way I've been describing them is mythics should be making impossible builds possible. Um, when you see someone with those mythics, you want to know as an outside player that that person earned it. I want to say not so much to make the game artificially harder, but so you can respect the person and what they've done because they actually did it by themselves in some respect. You never wonder, did that person just buy it off of somebody? Did that person just trade a whole bunch of stuff for it? Which is still a completely valid and will inevitably in this version of Diablo itself anyways, but for those highest tier, highest power items, um, respecting the game, respecting the loot hunt itself, I think is a good thing to maintain. Um, the only thing I would add about trading, and it's gonna seem, granted, getting a little bit in the weeds, but uh, going to the examples I gave of crafting items in lieu of having ancients and the ancient item topic that I discussed earlier, you could also introduce class of items. So what would this do? It would take items and kind of take them away from the rarity scale. Like we wouldn't have normal magic, legendary, rarity crafting items. They would be put more into classes of items. And isn't that the same thing one way or another? Well, yes, granted, it is. But the real purpose of doing this is so you can allow more of these items to be traded. Because right now, I mean, if you think of Diablo 3, what would we do with crafting items or items we would get in the world? Would we allow all the machines that come off of world bosses, not world bosses, D4 is slipping into knowledge of D3 at this point. Would we allow those keys from the key warrens to be traded for crafting materials for Forgotten Souls? That doesn't necessarily work out. It's a little bit too different of an item, and if that's the case, you know, Hellfire Neck is usually guess, so that's a fifth passive, so that could be considered too powerful in relationship to the base crafting materials. So if we're going to run in that situation in Diablo 4, well, it's like, well, this item and this item are a little bit too different, and this one could lead to have a bigger power influence versus a basic, then we're going to take this power one and make it automatically bind on trade at minimum, if not tradable at all, because if we make it anything else, it's too easy of a power game. So looking forward, again using some of the items I gave during the agent section, the one that reroll one affix or one to even max out a legendary power, you could, like I said before, those could be low tier power crafting items. So they can be traded for any other one item in that class. But for, say, the ones that, the defiling items, which, took away a certain amount from a random affix but increased the legendary power by a certain percentage, or the one that increased all affix and the legendary power by a certain percentage but the item became unrepairable, those would be high power class items and could only be traded within themselves. So by doing that, you're adding shades, you're adding basically shades of gray within that 3-bucket system, and it gives you, the developer, a little bit more leeway on what items can be traded if we color them different colors, like the color palooza that is PoE, where you could have like cyan and magenta and red and gold and black and white, whatever you want to do, to at least signify, at least by color scheme, which is something we're all used to in playing action RPGs, that okay, this item and this item and this item are all the same color, so they can be traded for each other that way. And there's other items that are this color and they can be traded for either one. So what's the whole point of this? Why are we why are we actually making the trading system a little bit more complex at this point? And I would say it's not really making it more complex. It's just giving the trading system a little bit more depth, because inevitably with this simple 3-bucket system, it kind of cheats the players at the high end. And I say it does that because once you get to the high end, you're only going to be looking for the best of the best, and it's going to be harder to get those items. Eventually you're going to reach a threshold in where you can play for a week and just not get anything as far as an upgrade one way or another. But any item you would naturally get at that high level, even if it wasn't good for you, you probably wouldn't be able to trade it, because it would be too powerful of an item, and the power gap between that item and any other item that that anyone else would be able to give you is so big that we probably wouldn't want that top tier item to be tradable anyways. And I agree with that, and I think most of the community agrees with that sentiment as well. But if you got one item that was in a high tier crafting class, and someone who's also very high tier got another item, and say you needed their item and they needed your item, as long as it's within the same class, so the rough amount of effort required to get said item is around equal for those top tier players, it still keeps trading somewhat relevant at the high end, and you eventually just don't dry out of opportunities, compared to where, granted, probably a majority of the player base is going to be in the low or mid game at the end life of their character, once they've leveled up and they've established their builds. So that's really all I want to talk about trading. And with that, we're going to move on to the last topic. Alright, so we're here on the last topic, which, for me, anyone who knows me knows that I lament Paragon in Diablo 3. And when I see long-term player progression systems, I kind of fall into the back of my chair and just kind of melt and go, along all the way. And it's because we've done this experiment twice. In Diablo 3, we basically had the replication of the D2 system, where we went from level 1 to 99 there. But in Diablo 3, it was level 1 to 100. And you got incremental not really helpful individually. Maybe when you got to level 100, it helped a little bit. Stat increases, kind of replicating the leveling process from 1 to 60 back then. And got magic and gold fine boost 3% per level, so you max out at 300% each on either one, which basically maxed your character sheet out before Nephilim, Glory, and all that stuff that we don't really talk about anymore. That we don't have to deal with that stuff. But the issue with that, with Paragon 1.0, as we'll call it, was it was meant to be a passive long-term player progression system. However, there was no other endgame. Monster power was introduced, but that was never really a endgame system. It was just, more difficulty for us to get difficulty. And the only really thing you had to do, the only way you could prove how good you were in the game back then was get the best gear as possible, go to GOM on the highest MP you could do, and see how fast you could kill him. That was D3 in a nutshell back then. Nothing really more, nothing really less. Unless you consider Alcazar runs a special thing that you could do. So, we have to look at what Paragon version 1.0 was. It was a finite system with a cap, with incremental rewards, that in the end were kind of required also. Because it wasn't until around level 40 to 60 that you really began to see the benefits of that magic and gold fine. So that kind of made the system feel required just to play the game too. So even though it's meant to be a passive system, even in that regard, it felt like you had to still actively do it. And without any other end game to there, to D3 at that point, that became the end game. Because it was the only other thing you could do. So that's a case of designer intent versus player use. So now we get to Reaper Souls, and I initially liked the changes. The stat allocation system seemed like it was going to be a good stat gap filler for your gear. So say you got, gloves, and it had no crit. Okay, you could switch out, but it had cooldown. So you can go to Paragon, take everything out of cooldown, put it into crit, and boom, you were more or less fine. But with the never nerf, always buff mentality, with the balancing by item mentality, where only the numbers on Legendaries or more appropriately sets were being buffed to balance the classes, which I understand, because it's a lot easier to target the sets and the numbers there to balance the classes against each other than going back to the base skills. Even though I think that's wrong, and it kind of makes it so items are propping up broken classes in some respect. I could at least see from a developmental standpoint and a time standpoint that's the easiest way to go. And then you have the augmentation system, which I felt could have just replaced Paragon after 800 was brought in addition to Paragon. And now we are where we are. Especially with the Necromancer coming in, and its biggest claim to fame is rat runs, which is experience runs for Paragon. And in doing so, without any real, again, formal form of endgame and Reaper of Souls, Paragon once again rose to be the endgame. Because eventually, you and your character, no matter how skilled you are, no matter how good your gear is, you will reach a natural cap in GRs. And GRs are the hardest thing you can do. So after that, what's the only other thing you can do to increase your power? Farm Paragon. So once again, the system that was meant to be passive is now seeked out actively by the players. So once again, try number 2 of designer intent versus player use. And this version Paragon was an infinite system with stat allocation, so there's some more complexity there. And it also had an inverted diminishing returns on it. It wasn't the return being the points you allocated diminished in value. It just increased the time, theoretically, that it would take to get those. So whether you increase the time or decrease the rewards, it's still diminishing. And look at where we are now with Paragon 2.0. Now, looking forward to Diablo 4, it seems like with endgame dungeons being the first system that was shown off to us, being a first step towards having a credible endgame, something to actually do, is great and amazing, and I love it. And we were told that there's going to be other systems at the end life of our character, or like when we reach max level, we've gotten basically our build and our legendaries. There'll be something more to do. So if you don't like endgame dungeons, there'll be X system or Y system or Z system, whatever they may be. And again, that's great. That's something we haven't had in the Diablo franchise since Diablo 3 launched, because there was nothing in Diablo 3, and GRs are really take them or leave them. So when I think of that, it's if these systems that are endgame dungeons and ones that have yet to be implemented, if especially with broadening out their purposes and really taking them all to their wits' end as far as functionality and usefulness to the player, maybe a long-term player progression system could work. But if it's aimed to be a passive system, just how Paragon was, and if at the end of the day, all those systems, again, through designer intent, player use, if the player base finds a way to supersede a lot of these endgame systems and shoot directly to that figurative long-term player progression system that you're going to try to create for Diablo 4, and if that system has credible power to it that makes superseding all these systems worth it, then we're basically, as players, choosing just to go to one system at the end and ignoring everything that was created for us. Because if efficiency dictates that, if min-maxing dictates that, a majority of the player base is going to do that. Especially if there's any form of competitive aspect in Diablo 4, which again, I hope there is. So, what am I trying to say here? It's, when I look back at some of the suggestions I have, how not having Ancients in, but carrying the legacy of Ancients, but also Primals, Kanai's Cube, the Mystic, along with creating other augmentation crafting items and making sure crafting really is a thing. When I look at this suggestion of making skill-based legendary powers being altered skills at that are predetermined by you, the developer, I think that's a good idea. When I look at how I suggested looking at skills, making sure that they're available to all, and taking skills and evolving them through the mastery system, as well as adding that mastery as an affix on gear. I understand all of that. If you like any of those ideas, would take time, would take effort, would take a lot of testing. And we're at that point where a system like that could ride or die at this point in the conceptual stage of D4, where a system could be birthed on Monday, idea-wise. It could be put into a rudimentary form on Wednesday and then tested and evaluated on Friday. And at that point, the system is either axed or it's continued development over the course of the next coming weeks. And that's fine. I understand that's a way of development, and it's actually a good way of development because it tries to get as many new things into the game as possible, and that's great. More things that we can have at our disposal, tools wise or other, from the player's perspective, is great. But it takes time, and an almost ironic twist how I say I want the game to validate my effort as a player, not my time. It's actually the same for you, developer. I want to validate your effort, not just your time. But time is finite. The games can get to a point where it's just going to have to be shipped. It's going to have to be tested and shipped. So I would rather not do a long-term player progression system like Paragon. Something like Seasonal Journey, however, is great because that's validating effort, not just time. So if you want to do something like Seasonal Journey, that's one good exception I could think of. But I would rather more time broadening out skills, broadening out the theme of a class, broadening out items, making crafting actually a unique entry into the Diablo franchise, and a whole slew of other things. I'd rather time be put on those elements to make them better than what they are and what we saw. Because I would rather have bigger, bolder systems that last longer throughout my character's lifetime than have shallower systems that don't last me as long because there's this end-all be-all system here that may not have much depth to it at all. And that's just an assumption. And this whole section is just my opinion. I understand that. But we have evidence of the only long-term player progression system that we've seen in Diablo 3 and Reaper Souls. And each one had their issues, had their problems, had their how they negatively affected the game as a whole. Again, I understand Diablo 3 and Diablo games in general are a tight web of systems that if you pluck one string on the web, it reverberates through, and you have to account for that. So I'd rather just not have to deal with that as a player. I'd rather just focus on the great base of systems that are available to us. So, I think I've gone on long enough. I don't want to feel like I'm lamenting this anything more, because I feel like I'm getting to that point. But I feel this needed to be said. And who knows, we'll see what comes of it when we get to the future demos and Friend to Family Alpha and closed betas of Diablo 4. Alright, here we are at the end. The end, I promise. First, I would like to address the developers and the community team. I would say, once again, thank you for inviting me to BlizzCon. It was a real treat. This was the third time out of 7 I was there on a media badge, and it was incredible to have that access once again. So thank you, thank you, thank you. It was actually really hard to keep track of all the new faces, at least to me, this time around, because everyone was able to say, hey, I'm on the Diablo 4 team. And we have the Diablo Immortal team, and we have the Diablo 3 team. It's almost too many developers to keep track of, which is a great thing. That's a great problem for me to have. And most of all, even if some of my criticisms seemed harsh, or I seem to lament them, I don't want to say it's, well, because I have passion for this and everything. Which I do, but I don't want to simply excuse that, because I understand sometimes if you have too much passion or something, it can blind you a little bit. And that's why I took a month before doing this, to try to get rid of those, see through those blinding, get rid of those blinders, reopen up my perspective and see what was I thinking, was it actually valid? Self-criticism before I would any criticism on what I saw at BlizzCon. And I don't envy your position, trying to find a silver bullet to satisfy rather unique and variable groups within the Diablo community itself. But I have faith in you as developers and as people, and I wish you none the best on your adventure creating this game. And I hope when we and myself get to play it, hopefully during closed beta. Who knows? Or whether it's open beta or when the game just gets released, that reigniting of the Diablo flame, the franchise, being Diablo 4, and it being its own unique entry into the franchise, not just being D2 remastered or Diablo 3.5, being its own unique, legitimate entry into the franchise. I look forward to that, and I wish you, again, nothing but best of luck, and hope you create one hell of a game. And to the community, I would say, first of all, thank you for listening to my rantings and about this feedback on Diablo 4. I would also issue a challenge to you, because something I've seen over the last month is two things. There's been a natural dying down of discussion about Diablo 4 because, well, we don't know that much more about Diablo 4. But that should never be an excuse not to continue the discussion. If you really care and you really want to see the best of the game, you can't just wait till the next update comes or the next video is shown, because that sets us up mentally as being the ultimate judge, jury, and executioner of systems when we're only waiting until what they show us to make judgments on it. And we need to be thinking about this stuff on the interim to give ideas, because that's where the real development happens. Because by the time stuff is ready to be shown to us, especially Friends and Family Alpha and Closed Beta, all these systems are essentially baked in a cake. The stuff that can be done to them is orders of magnitude less than what could have been done 6 months, 12 months, 18 months prior. So we have to make our voices known now, but do so respectfully with criticism and with examples. Put yourself on the line. How I put myself on the line here with examples, as well as my Development Hell 4 article that was 69 pages, 96 images I came up with, and over 16,500 words. My English teachers would shit a brick if they knew that I did something like that on my own, with no poking or prodding that I was going to fail English class. Because if we're not willing to do that ourselves, regardless of what you think, regardless of what you may want to expect, we kind of set ourselves up to be the ultimate victims at the end of the day. And I never liked that with certain people in the community. And that's the challenge to you, because it's our game too. We've made suggestions in the past and they've got incorporated. But those people were willing to make this suggestion and willing to give examples of why they should be in the game. We can do the same thing with Diablo 4. All I ask is, be civil, be constructive, and be your best player, so we can start to bridge our own internal conflict between the developers and us, the players. And we can hopefully get to a better place overall, and the game, being Diablo 4, will get better for it. So, other than that, that's all I got to say. If you would like to get in contact with me, or ask me any questions on any of the feedback that I've given here, you can find me on Twitter at DreadScythe. You can leave comments in the video below, and we'll see where this goes. May go somewhere, may not. But regardless, I'm giving my feedback because I want Diablo 4 to be the best game it can be on its own rights, and be a unique entry into the Diablo franchise that, as I get older, as my almost 8-month-year-old gets older, when the time is right, maybe when Diablo 5 comes out, we can be one hell of a Diablo family, and that would be a great prospect to look forward to. I'm DreadScythe. This has been fun. Hope it's been fun for you. I'm out.